Is everybody there? How's it going on this wonderful Monday morning? It's good to see all you guys. I'm really excited to get rolling on our questions for today. So I guess we'll just jump into it. It's a little bit stormy here in Florida. It's although right this second's not so bad, but there's kind of rolling storm. So if for some reason it cuts out or we get some craziness, that's why. All right, so let's just jump right into it. Oh, also I have my standing desk. Do you like this? I expect people to take a look at this for themselves if they're sitting a lot, because the standing desk is really cool. It goes up and down and everything. I love it. Okay, here we go. The first question comes from Gabriel Suarez. How do I determine what products to carry at my retail store? I'm asking this question because in my natural health stores, we try to carry the largest selection of wellness products, and part of how we make our large selection the most obvious is by covering all the different categories of product and not just having a lot of similar items. We brag that this, along with other things, make our stores better or different than our competitors. But I'm starting to notice that there are some categories in our store that just simply do not sell that well. I cannot decide if I should get rid of the entire category and hope to increase sales by adding more of what is selling, or would decrease the number of different categories available under one roof, also decrease the overall shopping experience, which may be what attracts some to our store in the first place. Good question. Okay, so I have a few thoughts on this. All right, so first off, if you're selling in a retail store in a real place, you're going to want to obviously differentiate yourself from online, right? So now you're not really competing with other brick and mortar stores. You're really competing with online. So how are you different? How is it better? So you've got to focus on items that are going to be most useful to get in person. So it's like stuff that you need as an emergency. It's stuff that you want to touch and feel, that you've got to test or something like that. It's going to be those types of products that are going to be most successful in a retail, like real world environment. The other thing that I think is worth noting here is you say you've got a lot of stuff, right? And so if you have stuff that isn't selling, like that's a good shtick that you got it, but if it's not selling, then that's essentially cash that's stuck in your inventory. So you invested money into that product is just sitting there. So that's essentially like leaving your dollars just sitting on the shelves and they're not moving. And they're not creating you any return on investment. You'd be better off selling that stuff and putting that money in the stock market or something, or a CD or the bank or whatever, because having it just sit on your shelves isn't doing any good if it's not helping you from a brand building perspective. It would be one thing if you told me, hey, we have all this stuff, most of it doesn't sell, but it's our shtick, and we have tons and tons of foot traffic because of it, because people like to look at stuff, but then they all end up buying the same stuff. I could maybe buy that, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. Another thing I want to point out is that too many options makes people not buy. You can Google this. There's tons and tons of research that shows that if you give people a limited number of options, they spend more and quicker than when they have a whole ton of options. You kind of overwhelm people with too many options. So I would look into that as kind of a psychology, human thing, to see how that applies to what your business model is and what you've been branding yourself as up to this point. You might actually be making it more difficult on yourself than it needs to be with that strategy. You can go the total opposite direction that you see, like companies this is a big kind of example, but like the Apple Store. The Apple Store is super streamlined. They have just their limited number of products, and then that's it. They don't have stuff all over the place. It's not like when you walk into a dollar store and you've got just stuff everywhere. So I would see kind of like what you really want to do as far as the business goes, and kind of like how that fits into kind of like consumer behavior, and does your brand actually help or hinder that. But if you have inventory that isn't selling, unless there's a strategy around why you have it, it's probably worth getting rid of and focusing on stuff that does work. All right, next question. Lindsay Grifka. Should I buy a prospect email list or continue to research and create one on my own? I have been creating an email list of smoke shops, both online and brick and mortar, on my own and with the help of my sister. It's a slow process, but by doing it this way, I ensure that the companies I reach out to carry other brands rather than just their own. I would use the email list to send cold emails to see if the brand is interested in carrying my product. Okay, so whenever you're doing work yourself or with a family member or with anybody that you can get to work, quote unquote, for free, you really do have to take into account those hours as if you were paying for them. just because you're not paying yourself or your sister to make those lists, you don't, it's not free. There's still an opportunity cost, right? Because let's say you guys spend 10 hours each on these lists. 10 hours each, what else could you have done in those 10 hours? Well, just hypothetically, you could go work at McDonald's for $12 an hour. I don't know what it is, but just hypothetically. So that's $120 for your 10 hours and $120 for your sister's 10 hours. So you actually spent $240 in opportunity cost just using the McDonald's example, and you probably have a higher hourly rate than that with something else you could be doing. So it's probably even higher than that. But so you spent $240 on creating these lists that you thought you were creating for free. So you have to take that into account. So when you're deciding if you're going to buy a list, or you have basically three options. You can do the list yourself the way that you're doing it. You can buy the list from somebody who's already compiled it in some fashion, however they did that. You can also hire outsourced VA people, and you can build your process. Whatever process you taught your sister, you can teach somebody in Bangladesh or India or something like that to do that same exact process and then return it back to you. Again, thinking in terms of hourly rates. Just because you live in the US, your hourly rate is probably way higher than somebody who lives in Bangladesh. So just from an opportunity cost perspective. So I would really look at what is it actually costing you to develop that list, and how does that compare to your other options when you're actually talking about spending real money. Now, of course, on the other hand, there is always the point that people make, well, I don't have the money to spend on the list. I don't actually physically don't have the money. So again, is there another way for you to make the money quicker in some other scenario, and then you can bring that money back, buy the list in bigger volume? Because volume, when you're talking about cold emails, volume is going to be key. If you only generate a list of 100 emails, you're not going to get too far. You probably need thousands. And so, so I would think about the opportunity cost. The other thing that I wanted to point out as it related to this was, if you're sending out cold emails and you're worried about sending it only to companies that accept outside brands, not just their own, what's the difference? Just get a list of a whole bunch of, like, who cares? It's a cold email. So if you don't have to be, if you send it to somebody who doesn't take outside brands, the email doesn't cost you anything to send it. You're spending a lot of time and money, again, either directly or indirectly, in trying to sort out those people beforehand. So, like, is it worth the extra money to make sure you only send it to people who are accepting outside brands, or you might as well just send them the cold email, and if they don't accept outside brands, then who cares? They'll just delete the email, or they'll just say unsubscribe me or whatever. So that would be my thought on the deal, is those two things. What's it actually cost you to develop the list the way you're doing it? And if you're sending out cold emails, does it really matter if these people don't use outside brands in their retail setups? Okay, cool. That's a good one. Tim Schiffer. What are your thoughts on opening a physical retail location in this environment when the trend is away from that? I own and operate an e-commerce outdoor retail store focused on hiking, camping, and backpacking. We've been around for 2.5 years, experiencing steady but not yet explosive growth. Brick and mortar has been a desire of mine since the business started and was in our 3 to 5 year plan. Okay, so whenever you're talking about retail in today's environment, given that you've got these huge retailers that are going out of business, you've got to be very strategic if you make that decision to go retail. Not to say that there isn't great opportunity in brick and mortar retail. I would just say that you need to be very strategic and know why you're doing it and what the value to your market is. Remember, business is about supplying value to your customer, not whatever your vision for the company was when you made the business plan. So I would just keep that in mind. Now, from a strategic perspective, you've got to focus on, so like, let's say you're focusing on niche location retail. So for example, again, the idea that people need these products today, that they need the products today and they need them right now, and they want to touch and feel them before they buy them, then that's a good location to be in. It's, again, niche-y, but it's a good spot to be. So for a good example of this is like surf shops around a beach, right? If people are at the beach and they want to buy something from a surf shop, they're not going to want to order that from Amazon. They want to buy it right now because they happen to be walking by and there's a lot of foot traffic, that sort of thing, within your niche kind of market. So you have to be very specific when you make those retail decisions. So it has to be stuff people want to buy right away. It has to be the things that they like to hold, and then just being you've got to be in the right exact spot with if you're going to go retail. For example, with the surf shop example, you're not going to put a surf shop even 4 blocks from the beach, even though it might be a beachy area. But again, if it isn't super focused on your market, and your market's direct traffic, and if you're outdoor stuff, I mean, I could totally see that working in some sort of area where the outdoor activities are, again, right there. Otherwise, they're going to order it ahead of time, or they're going to just have it with them or whatever. So that would be my thought. I'm not a big, obviously, unless there's a very specific example, I'm not too bullish on retail at this point. I'm going to have to see how that all shakes out. All right. This one says it's from Sean Thomas. So I think this might be a generic one or maybe a combination. But anyway, here we go. Without a team to delegate to and without the budget to hire a full team, how did you get things done when you first started your company and when it was just you? I hear many experienced entrepreneurs talk about delegating and only doing the things that are great at, and unfortunately, it's only me. I'm just starting, so I don't have the team nor the money to hire a full team. I know I can't be alone in trying to understand how to get everything done on a limited budget, and it's only being me. How did you do it when you were first starting? Is it just a mindset, or where did you get to learn everything to get everything done? Looking for a story. Thanks so much. Awesome. That's a great question, and very applicable to people with who are just starting out and it's just them. Okay, so I do have a story around that. So when I was 17, something like that, I started an internet company that I eventually sold to a Wall Street company like 2.5 years later. So I started out on my own because it was just me, and I didn't really even know anything about, I mean, I knew stuff about computers, like in terms of PCs and like actually working on them at your desktop, but I didn't really know much about the internet. I was on like AOL, at the time. And so I started this business. I just started with like a cheap hosting package that I learned how to kind of do some HTML stuff on my own, and I was learning, and so I spent a lot of time learning and a lot of time trying things. And the thing that I like about programming and coding, as I got more sophisticated and actually started to do that, is that you can try something, hit the run button, and if it doesn't work, you can change it and try again, hit the run button, try again, try again, try again, try again. I learned very well that way. And so I did that for hours and hours, and I mean like morning till night, learning how to do this, right? So then as the business grew, which really the business was traffic generation, I had a bunch of different websites of my own, and I was cross-linked to a whole bunch of other people, and I was kind of networking amongst the different websites, and I would just drive more and more and more traffic, which then the more and more traffic that I drove, the more sophisticated my back-end infrastructure had to be. So that was kind of my balance between trying to generate new business, which was essentially the traffic, which is how I generated revenue, versus the activities of operating the business, which was them running the servers and making sure that all of the websites and everything worked, and that I had the capacity, because at the time bandwidth was an issue on websites. I literally had a server like that I could physically see and touch, so that was pretty cool. And then it eventually got bigger and past that, but at one point that was kind of like the bottleneck for me. And so that's really what I saw. I was always kind of torn between the operational side and the sales side, and I see this over and over again with AO companies. I even see this with bigger companies too, if you can believe it. There's certain thresholds where a company needs to make that next leap, and so you guys, AOers who have a tendency to be smaller businesses, look at it like, oh, this is just a problem of smaller businesses, and it really isn't. Every time a company needs to make that next leap to the next level, there's kind of this threshold where they have to essentially either grow sales super quickly and then hope that production can keep up, and that helps create the cash flow to be able to expand the business, or they have to raise money, right? So that's why companies raise money, because they're growing and they need more money to grow the production side while the sales side is growing, or vice versa, or both at the same time. So this is not an unusual issue that's unique only to one person operations. this sort of comes up over and over again as companies get larger and larger at different stages. So how I dealt with it with my internet company was I did the grow sales very quickly scenario, and it wasn't really like a choice. It was just sort of the way that it worked out in that particular case. And so luckily I didn't have receivables really. Cash came quickly. I always had money coming in. If I grew sales, cash came in immediately. And so I got to the point where I was, 12, 16 hours a day between the production and kind of the sales networking aspects of what I was doing. And then when I kind of hit that threshold where I just kind of ran out of hours, and literally the business would not grow anymore, I luckily had the cash flow to be able to hire that first person, and then hire the second person, hire the third person. And as I hired people, they all were covered by additional cash flow because sales were growing. So I think that's kind of the key. I think the key is that if you don't have the money to support the growth that you want, or to be able to manage the growth that you want, then you need to put all your focus in on getting the money to be able to do it. So whether that is you want to bring on investors, that's fine. You want to, increase sales, that's okay too. You want to change your business model so that it doesn't have receivables anymore, that's a great way to do it. Like that's something people always overlook. They immediately jump to either investors or, oh, I just need more sales. I've seen companies that have, I've done it myself with companies. I've acquired companies with the focus of, boy, these receivables are stretched out 90 to 120 days. Let's just change our payment policy for our customers. And now we have instant cash flow all the time. And so the business becomes self-sustaining from a finance perspective because now we have cash coming in. Our customers are financing us at that point instead of us financing our customers. So you can even look at kind of business plan, business policy changes that kind of help alleviate these cash issues so that you can hire and you can grow and you can do what you need to do. If it's just you at this stage, focus all your attention on driving revenue. And another thing that I would recommend in this situation and to everybody is don't get bogged down in the stuff that hasn't, like, people busy themselves with operational things that don't generate any money. So focus your attention on the things that generate you the money, that generate the sales, or however your business makes money. That's where you should be spending 90% of your time, especially if you're in the position of, I don't have enough money to hire somebody to help me. You've got to focus on the money driving part of what you're doing, because otherwise you'll never have enough money to get somebody. If you're working 80% of your time on operational things that generate you no money, and you're just delivering, then you're not going to be able to grow past the point that you're at. So you've got to put the focus on the again, raising money, sales, policy changes to drive, cash in the door, whatever it is. You've got to put all your attention on that point until you have enough money to hire that first person. And also don't get bogged down in this idea that you have to hire a full-time person. I see that a lot too. People get really focused on this vision for, I'm going to have all these employees and this is going to happen and that's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. You don't really need to do that. Focus in on the processes, map them out, be very specific about what this process actually looks like, and then decide how much of this can I hand off to somebody. What you might find is that it's not as, you might find that the chunk of time that you spend the most on is the easiest thing and the cheapest thing to hand off to somebody. So you may not even need a full-time person. This may be an outsourced type situation, or even an automation type situation where you can, with some creative use of software, you might even be able to speed things up and eliminate some of those hours. That's another thing too, is if you are looking at eliminating and improving process efficiency, you can't be afraid to spend the extra time there, knowing that as soon as you complete the project, now all of those hours going forward are given back to you. So that's another way to look at it as well. Cool. That was a good question. All right, next question. Bob Guerrero. When leaving a job, are there ways to fight a non-compete, and what are other things I should look out for? Now that I'm starting my side business, I also thought, why not look to quit my day job and do that work as a freelancer for myself instead of the company? But I don't want to get into legal problems with my 12-month non-compete or have any other issues. Just wondering what else I should take into consideration. So I have a couple of thoughts on that. So the first thing is that non-competes, depending on your state and depending on how well written they are, they're generally pretty hard to enforce. like a true non-compete. Non-solicitation, on the other hand, is much easier to enforce. So if you are going to leave your company and you have a non-compete, what does that really mean? That means that you can't, like, let's say you're a graphic designer. Does that mean you can't do graphic design at all for the next year? Like, that's completely unenforceable. No court is going to say, oh yeah, you can't be a graphic designer anymore because you quit this company. So the non-compete I would be less concerned with. Non-solicitation, on the other hand, is something that you're going to have to pay more close attention to. So if you have customers or relationships that you know that are from the company, it's going to be harder for you to take those with you, that they could potentially call you on and say, hey, those are our customers or those are our connections, and then you could get in trouble for that. So don't be thinking that you're going to take any of your current customers with you unless you want to fight about it, potentially. The other thing that is a good way to handle these situations sometimes is just talk to the company that you're working for. And tell them, hey, I'm going out on my own. I think it's the right thing for me. This is the direction I'm going. And then turn your job into your first customer, right? So like that company needs your services. Just have them put you out into the field. In fact, you might even be able to, depending on how big the company is that you're working for, this probably won't work with bigger companies, but it will definitely work with smaller ones, is just tell them, look, I'm going out on my own on this, and you could continue to pay me the same amount that you're paying me. I'm just going to work less hours and only focus on these specific tasks. Or you can pay me a little bit less than what you're currently paying me. I'm going to focus on these tasks. And you're going to pay me as a company, so you're going to pay me $10.99. So that means they're going to save all of the payroll taxes that they normally would be paying for you as an employee if you're a W-2 employee now. So you're essentially you're saying I'm going to get the same amount of work done for you for a cheaper price than having me as a full-time employee. So that's sometimes a good conversation to have, and that also makes the relationship really positive, so that way you're not going to have any fight or any argument about non-solicitation or non-compete or anything, because everybody knows what's going on and everyone's benefiting from the new arrangement. So that's something else to think about. But other than that, yeah, non-competes are less concerning to me. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so talk to a lawyer if you're super concerned about it. But non-solicitations, on the other hand, that's something you have to take a little more seriously. So you can't steal any of those customers from the company that you currently work with. All right, so that is a good question on that one. Let's move on to Alyssa Tambazi. I want to start an organizing business, and I'm not sure if I should start from scratch and create a new LLC or use my old one and recreate it, or start with trial clients before I do anything. I currently have a consulting business that hasn't taken off, and I'm not sure that's where my passion is. I realize one of my main passions is organizing, and I feel I would be much more successful doing that for people, as I already have in the past. I feel that I can market to my existing PT clients and friends for now and see where that takes me. I already have one client I do this for, and I get compliments often on how organized I am in my life is. Cool. Okay, so you have two different questions basically here. The one is a kind of a technical question around LLCs and kind of corporate structure. And the answer to that question is, if your current LLC, corporate structure entity, doesn't have any liability associated with it, like meaning like you haven't been sued, you're not expecting to get sued, you don't have all kinds of payables or debts or anything like that associated with that company, you can just use the same LLC. You don't have to incorporate another one, just to keep it simple. You could just file a DBA. Like, that's why you see that with big companies all the time, where they have some legal name and then they have a DBA of the brand name that they actually use. So you can just file a DBA, doing business as, for your old LLC. But that said too is that the thing that you pointed out at the end of your question, or just start with trial clients before I do anything, that's kind of a good philosophical approach to a lot of stuff in business, and kind of what I always am talking about is that just get right to the meat of it. Try not to dance around what is going to be the constraint, what is going to be the thing that limits you from moving forward. Is it this decision about the corporate structure, which you can spend a lot of time hemming and hawing and deciding, oh, I'm going to do this. Okay, I'm going to make a new LLC, and then I'm going to spend time and money on that. Does that really matter? No. Does anyone care about that? No. Does that have anything to do with your success? No. What has to do with success is your last point about is about having getting those new clients. And so, are you going to get those new clients? Is this a viable business? Do you have a product that people are actually interested in? Do you know how to communicate with that market to sell to them? Focus on those questions. Focus on doing that stuff. People do have a tendency to ignore those things or like to focus on other things because the other things are easier, stuff that they can actually make a decision and make happen. That ambiguous stuff that you have to work through, put your attention on that. Because once you know that, then you can grow the business and then you can sell. I'm very guilty of, in my career, starting businesses where I spend 6 months, a year, 2 years, in a couple cases over $1 million or more, starting a business or acquiring a business or whatever the case may be, and focusing on all these operational things and setting everything up and not paying attention to the market, the product, all that stuff. And then just kind of like, I'm open, I'm here, and then ka-chunk, nothing happens. And I'm still back at the exact same square one I was 2 years ago before I even spent any money. I could have simply just started working on, the product market fit. How do I communicate with my market? How do I make sales? Like I could think about all that stuff before I did anything. And then if I hit up against a wall, then I can move on to something else or change something before I spend any time and money. So I would put a lot of focus on start with trial clients before you do anything, to quote your own words back to you. I think that's a good place to start. And if you get 2 or 3 clients, great. And you already have this other LLC. If it's not, burdened in any way, then just use that one and just do a DBA if you want to, change the name. Okay. Next question. Marlena Carter. What are some things to do in order to prepare to sell a business? Dog grooming salon in operation for 8 years. After there things to do that will are there things to do that will increase value and expedite the process? Even the thought of determining the value is a challenging concept for me. Well, this is something I know a lot about because I've been doing M&A stuff forever since I started, basically. So I'm very comfortable in this space. So the first question you ask is, what are some things to do in order to prepare to sell the business? The first and most important thing is, if you don't have this, start working on it now. You need to have 2 years, at least, maybe 3, of clean books. So if you're putting all of your personal expenses through the business and everything isn't clean in your accounting, make it clean and carry it all the way through tax preparation and file your taxes with proper reporting of all of your revenue and expenses. As entrepreneurs, sometimes we write a lot of stuff off that is maybe personal to us, which is fine and which is totally legal in most cases. No problem. But the problem is when a buyer comes along, they want proof, rightfully so, of how much money you make. So the more ambiguity around that proof, or the lot of explaining that you're doing, trying to justify why your taxes don't match what you're saying you normally make and all these things, they're going to lower their valuation. They're going to lower how much they want to pay you in order to buy your business because they don't really know. So that their risk of not knowing translates to a lower amount of money to you. So that's the first thing. 2 years at minimum, maybe 3 years of clean books and records, and then filed with the government. Pay your taxes, do all the things you're supposed to do if you really made money. Next thing, reoccurring revenue. You've got to be able to either have a reoccurring revenue model or be able to kind of show like you have a reoccurring revenue. You say it's a dog grooming salon, so you do have reoccurring revenue. I'm sure the same customers come to you over and over and over again. I would very clearly quantify how much of your revenue is generated from customers that are coming over and over and over again. What's the lifetime value of a new customer? So you know that if a new customer comes through, you know that customer is going to be with you for 14 months on average, and then they're going to spend X amount per month. Doing all those calculations ahead of time, that is super valuable, like super valuable. I can help you with all that stuff, actually. That's fun stuff to try to figure all that out, because then when you present that to the buyer, they know that you know what your business is worth. If you don't really know that, that's an opportunity for them to do the calculation without you, know that your business is worth more than what you think it is, and then they can give you, they can make that spread between what they tell you the business is worth and what they think it's worth, which is good. There's going to be a spread there anyway, because otherwise it's not going to be one-to-one. There's always going to be, they need to pay less than what they think it's worth, because otherwise they're not going to buy it. So they're always going to pay less than what they think it's worth, but trying to shrink that margin a little bit is your job, and that's your value in the business. So recurring revenue. The next one is recurring sales process. This is another big one. If you can show that you understand how to communicate with your market and you know how to generate new customers, and you've been doing this for an extended period of time, and you have it all documented, not just in your brain, but you've written it down, even better that you've taught other people that are not you to do it, that's also worth a lot of money. A big problem that a lot of companies have is that the owner, the shareholder, is also the operator. So I guess that would be a fourth thing, actually. Get yourself out of your business if you want to sell your business, because if you're stuck in the business, like you're physically running everything, even if you're only doing 20-30% of that physically running, now the buyer is going to look at you and say, okay, so you make 100 grand a year in this business, but in reality, after I take all the time that you spend in the business out as an employee doing different things, you really only make $20,000 a year. So if you only make $20,000 a year, the business is only worth whatever. So that's another thing you got to really look at, is how much time do you spend in the business? What will it take to get you out of the business from a effort and kind of ongoing cost perspective? Because if you're in the business and you're not paying yourself as an employee, then that you can simply take that money and pay some other person as an employee to do that same work, then your valuation is probably going to be screwed up, or there's going to be a lot of arguing about what the company's actually worth. That's a common issue in small business valuations, is what is the company worth once you take the cost of replacing the owner out of the cash flow. So that's another thing to look at. And I think that is it for that. I'm gonna write that one down too. Okay, next one. Gabrielle Suarez, looking for suggestions or advice on sourcing non-traditional or non-SBA financing options for my franchisees. Loans anywhere from $75,000 to $150,000. Because my franchise model includes the sale of CBD oil, most traditional lenders such as major banks or the SBA will not offer financing to our franchisees. I need help finding alternative financing solutions for our franchisees. Even a lead to someone very experienced in this field that may be able to help me is appreciated. Okay, so I can help you with that, Gabriel. This is there's a lot of people in the franchise world who finance franchisees as investors, right? So that's going to be your bet. These are not going to be loans as you suggested through traditional banks. So you can probably find, and I could probably point you in some directions of these groups. And really what they do is they essentially say, okay, I want to buy a whole bunch of franchises, but I don't want to operate any of them. So I'm going to invest as the investor in this particular brand, and I'm going to look to try to roll out 30 of these locations. And I want to be paired up with operators so that I don't have to deal with any of the operation stuff. Now, so that's going to be, that's a totally doable solution as far as the legalities of the CBD and all that stuff go. The challenge with that is that you'll have to just kind of like, if you're going to sell to your franchisee, you're now kind of selling to the investor too. So you have to be able to show how the cash flow is sufficient from each store to be able to pay the operator franchisee as well as create some sort of meaningful cash flow back to the investor. A lot of times when people invest in a new business, if it's their own money or even through the bank, they look at that initial investment as kind of like sunk cost, and then they don't really think about it. Like they just think about the current income that they're going to make going forward. If you have an investor wants to see, okay, I spent $100,000 on this location, and if I take that $100,000 and I buy stock with it, index, S&P 500 index fund, I can in general get an 8 to 9% return over a long period of time. So that means this investment I need to make more than 8 to 9%, right? So if you can show in your pro forma that the franchisee will be able to make a living, and that the investor, in terms of real cash now today, can make at least better than the stock market, 8, 9, 10%, something like that, and ideally significantly better than that in terms of real income, that's going to be your best bet. Like if you can kind of put that together, and if it's in reality, if that makes sense, then you won't have any trouble raising money for your franchisees or having your franchisees connect to these people. Another thing that would be good to show too from an investor's perspective would be how you support those franchisees. I've seen small franchise operations that have terrible support, and a lot of times franchisees fail because they don't have good support from the franchisor. So really having solid franchisor support for the franchisees and being able to demonstrate that to investors is a super helpful thing to be able to do, because again, they're kind of wanting you to be, they want a good brand, they want a good franchisor. So the more you can show that, the better. Yeah, so that's kind of a business model thing that I think could be helpful. I can help with that if there was any interest in digging into that a little bit. Okay. Oh, I'm already on the last question. Very exciting. Here we go. Stephen Davis asks us, what is your advice regarding how to handle prospects that are solely focused on price? Sud Consulting, LLC, specializes in human resources, workers' compensation, and financial issues the companies face. We represent multiple professional employment organizations. The reason I am asking this question is that I am currently dealing with a prospect who is solely focused on price, regardless of value. The prospect is a sizable company that has great influence in their industry. Obviously, you can only reduce the price so far, but what is the best way to manage the situation? I do not want to lose a prospect and potential future referral business. All right, this is kind of a tough question because you actually pre-answered it, because you said regardless of value. So that's the key, right? So price only becomes a question when they don't see a difference in value from one offering to the other. So if your company is offering something that has a greater value than, like legitimately has a greater value than another company, and they don't see that, then it's possible that you're not doing a good enough job of representing that, so they don't understand it. Like, you've got to do a better job explaining that to them. Because honestly, if the value really was greater and you explained it properly, they would definitely go with you and not worry about the price, right? Because the value means that they're getting more for that same price than they were getting in the other scenario. Now that said, is a Ferrari a better value than a Hyundai? I don't know. Like, some people would argue yes, and others people would say, no, I just want a Hyundai to just get me from here to there, right? I just need 4 wheels to get from here to here. I don't need the Ferrari. Where other people will say, yes, of course it's a greater value. That's why I pay more for it. So there's those conversations. From the industry that you're in, and only knowing just from that little paragraph right there, the thing that I find interesting is that you're probably in a commoditized industry, from what I know of that industry. There's a lot of players, there's a lot of big players, and people are focused on price. There isn't a lot of value add, my understanding. Maybe you can teach me something different, something new. But for the most part, it's hard to add value in that space because most people are just looking to get the job done as cost effectively as possible. So now that's a commoditized industry, and really the only way to compete in a commoditized industry is through efficiency. You have to be more efficient than everybody else. So you're saying you represent multiple professional employment organizations, PEOs, and as such, I'm guessing that you have some sort of broker relationship or rep relationship with those organizations. So your margin is essentially inefficiency, right? Like the reason they're squeezing your prices is because if they were to buy direct from the PEO, then their cost would be less because they don't have this broker fee in the middle to pay. So you're starting out at a disadvantage because you're in the middle of this transaction. And in a commoditized industry, efficiency is what it's all about. So I would really look at kind of just in general, the products that you offer, the things that you offer, how do you make the offering more efficient so that you can hit the price points where the market is? That's one way to look at this. Or you have to figure out how to add tremendous value that's maybe like something else that's related that kind of connects. Again, that goes back to the product offering thing, because if the general basic offering, there isn't a distinguishable value from one company to the next, then you're going to be having this price conversation all the time. Another thing to look at is there a sub-market niche here? So you're saying that this is a big company that you're dealing with, they're really worried about price, and they potentially can refer you to all these other people. Well, honestly, if they refer you to other people who are also only worried about price, I don't know how helpful that is to you. If they're not making, if their business to you isn't worth a lot because of their, like in terms of profit, not just volume, right? There's a difference there. A big company can give you a lot of volume, but if they don't give you any profit, then who cares? Like, I'd rather have a small amount of revenue and have lots of profit than have lots of revenue and no profit. So I would look and see if there's a sub-market niche that you can be involved in that allows you to offer a very specific service or value add to that isn't this big company or isn't a big company that's going to be, you know, solely focused on the commoditized aspects of the industry. You'll find that there's specific niches that are going to be more receptive to a conversation about value. So if you're hitting your head against the wall with this one, there's other fish in the sea, right? Don't worry about it. Like, do the best that you can, give them the best offer that you can, and then say to yourself, if they don't get it, if they don't see it, I might be just talking to the wrong people for me, for my business. Or you have to make the decision to change your product to be able to accommodate that price structure that they're pushing you on. It's really kind of the two things. They're either going to see the value and they're going to come up to you, or you're going to see their price point and figure out how to make money at that price point. Those are really the only two options that you have. I don't like having tons of price conversations like that. I don't like being in commoditized markets. I'm not in any of that. So I usually like to go the other direction. I like to go to the value and, you know, unique product offering to a particular niche market, and then try to grow that real big. That's kind of my focus. Okay, I think that is it. Happy November, everyone. It was good to see you again. The first time with my standing desk here, which I love. So if I connect with any of you guys, you will likely see me standing on Zoom nowadays. And that's it. So reach out to me through AO if you're at all interested in talking about anything that I talked about today. And I will see you guys next month, if not sooner.